President McFaul, let me ask you to pick up on what the ripple effect is of this. And actually, let me ask you something that I thought, well, Ali Razu was reporting. By bombing the factory where the Neptune missiles are made, the Russians are confirming that their lie is just that, a lie, that it was Ukrainian Neptune missiles that sunk their flagship, right?
That's a great point. That is an excellent point. I sometimes wonder why anybody ever believes anything that a Russian government official says at all. I mean, that we had to confirm it. It's great we confirmed what it was. But I think anytime we hear anything from them about what's happening on the battlefield, we should treat it as part of their disinformation tactics. But now it's been confirmed. We know why that ship sank. It wasn't because of some Russian mistakes. It was because of a Ukrainian victory.
Michael Crowley, take me inside. We've covered this as a new phase, and I feel like while we've been talking about a new phase has begun in Ukraine, and that new phase includes this, what's been described as saber rattling on the part of the Russians, and this more targeted strike on the weapons factory outside of Kyiv. A foreshadowing of brutality, which is interesting as a psychological tool of war, because the brutality in Bucha has already been revealed, not just to the Ukrainians, but the world. How is the administration sort of adjusting to the new phases on both the Ukrainian side and the Russian side?
Well, Nicole, the administration is just, stepping it up and pumping more weapons into Ukraine. And I think that the letter that the State Department received this week, it puts a fascinating, frame on the key question here, which is, where is Vladimir Putin's red line? Does he have one? Does he know what it is? I don't think the U.S. knows what it is. The point at which he says NATO and the West and the United States are giving Ukraine too much. This is I can't tolerate this. Too many Russian soldiers are dying. I'm at risk of losing. Because what we have seen in recent weeks is just this increased flow of weaponry to Ukraine as Russia beats a retreat, takes, incredible losses. Obviously, Ukraine is suffering enormously and tragically, but this has been basically a debacle for Russia. And at this point, I think if you had kind of looked into a crystal ball as an expert weeks ago, you might have said, well, Putin, maybe nearing the point where he's going to use a tactical nuclear weapon, or Putin by now would be striking NATO supply lines, possibly even striking into NATO territory, daring NATO to invoke Article 5. He's not doing any of that. I mean, at the moment, he looks like a bit of a paper tiger. So the answer to your question is the U.S. and the West is doing more and more. But I think the big question is whether and when Putin finally draws the line. Is there going to be some major retaliation? It could be a cyber attack. It could be a shot into NATO territory across one of the borders. No one seems to know, and that's the big shoe I'm waiting to see drop.
You write about these questions, Ambassador McFaul. I want to read from your piece in the Washington Post. Russia's army is struggling mightily in a war against a smaller and lesser armed Ukrainian army. Under such circumstances, Putin is highly unlikely to attack the largest military alliance in the world, anchored by the most powerful military in the world, the United States. Putin is angry and unhinged, but not suicidal. Biden and his national security team might have classified intelligence that suggests that these risks of escalation are greater than I can assess through open sources. If not, however, then the free world needs to provide Ukrainians with the quality and quantity of weapons to prevail in the Donbass. A Ukrainian win or stalemate in that battle will make us and our NATO allies more secure. A loss will produce the opposite. There are others with knowledge of the dynamics in the region and the stakes saying the same thing, that right now, Ambassador Bill Taylor is saying right now Ukraine needs to win. Tell me what that looks like and how short we are of doing for them what you call for in your piece.
Well, sir, first, two things. I mean, I think the red line that Michael's talking about, what is Putin's red line, is an essential question. And in my assessment, it's not about them attacking NATO, as you just read. It's not about a nuclear war with us. They rolled out Peskov and Medvedev to make that clear for us. It's all about whether or not he might use a tactical nuclear weapon or not in Ukraine. I'm skeptical that he would. I think the consequences of that are high, but we got to keep our focus on those red lines. on victory, I just want to make it crystal clear. If Putin wins, all of our allies in the region are going to be more threatened. All of our allies and partners in the Middle East and Asia will also feel more insecure, excuse me. And if he loses, it's the exact opposite. And therefore, I do think there has been a change in the Biden administration. I talk to them fairly frequently, including just today, some senior Pentagon officials. I think they understand that, and they want to see a scenario in which the world can see that Putin gambled, he overreached. This is his Afghanistan. This is what Brezhnev did in Afghanistan. He overreached. And as a result, they're weaker, not stronger, as a result of this military intervention. And I think they're all in to achieve that outcome.
The administration, you think the Biden administration is all in to help the Ukrainians?
Well, with a couple of caveats. Let me be careful. They have chosen, for instance, not to send MiG-29s, right? They have chosen not to send tanks, at least not yet. So they're drawing the line a little bit different than what I am, where I would. But generally speaking, the new kinds of weapons you have, the quantity, especially the long-range artillery that they just announced 2 days ago. Zelensky gave them a list, and they delivered on a lot of that list. Not all of the list, Zelensky would tell you, but they seem like they're leaning in as opposed to waiting. 2 or 3 weeks ago, the government in Ukraine was quite disappointed at how slow the United States and the West was moving. It feels like they've shifted because they understand the Battle of Donbass is where this war could be decided, and they want to help the Ukrainians as much as they can to win the Battle of Donbass.
Michael Crowley, the rhetoric used by President Zelensky is this sort of invisible weapon of war that the Ukrainians have, that they have used to just extraordinary effect. It will be studied for a very, very long time. I have paid a lot of attention to the words he's used. He was calling Putin a war criminal days and weeks before. But the American president, and I'm not suggesting it's causal, I'm saying they see these things the same way. They see Putin the same way. President Zelensky escalated and described what was happening in his country as a genocide. It didn't take President Biden long to see enough evidence that that was indeed what Vladimir Putin was doing in Ukraine, trying to eliminate the Ukrainian people, targeting civilians, decimating towns, reducing parts of the country to dust, using rape as a weapon of war. Zelensky today has asked the Biden administration to classify Russia and Vladimir Putin as a state sponsor of terror. What's the reaction?
Well, I think it rings true on some level. It's obvious that that Russia is terrorizing the civilian population of Ukraine. And by the way, I think you put your finger on something that's so essential. I don't think there's any way Vladimir Putin could have predicted the resonance that Zelensky as an individual leader would have in the West. I mean, this had to have completely blindsided him. No one else predicted it. No one in the West thought that Zelensky was going to develop this cult of personality, and it's been one of Ukraine's greatest assets. I mean, after Javelin missiles, it's it's Zelensky on streaming video. It's just been astonishing, and he has, as you have said, had a way of kind of shaping and leading the debate in the West. And I think this is a very, if I can say, clever new formulation. He's finding different ways to reframe Putin and Russia's behavior and get a conversation going in the West that keeps people engaged, interested, and outraged. And we haven't really kicked around this concept of terrorism, what it means in the context of a more conventional battlefield. Now, I can't tell you whether our terrorist designations would actually apply in a more conventional sense like the one we're seeing now. This, at least for me, is new ground, so I don't know what's likely to happen. But I think you put your finger exactly on the interesting thing here, is that the skill he has had in framing these conversations, keeping them going. This is all tremendously to Ukraine's benefit because it maintains popular support in Western countries for the kinds of arms shipments we're seeing, and also a certain amount of patience. We'll see how long it lasts for these higher energy and other prices that are causing real disruptions.
And I mean, tragically, what President Zelensky has going from him is a terrorized population, a decimated swath of his country. I mean, the tragedy is that he's correct. So the rhetoric is only as powerful as it is because it's speaking this brutal, eloquent truth about what's happened to his country and his people at the hands of Vladimir Putin. And I wonder, Ambassador McFaul, your thoughts about what this debate looks like inside our government about whether or not to consider designating Russia as a state sponsor of terror.
Well, Nicole, I run a international working group on sanctions. Academics like myself, a lot of former government officials, Europeans, Ukrainians. We met on Tuesday, and we were discussing, we're going to have a paper come out on Monday. We're discussing exactly whether we should include this proposal from the Ukrainian government. And to your point about strategic communications, you know who Zoom bombed our call? President Zelensky. He suddenly showed up. And he wanted to encourage us to lean in to do that. Just to echo the point you're making about how I think they're incredibly smart about strategic communications. I'm with Michael. I don't know. U.S. government officials have briefed our group as well, just to be clear. I don't think they have thought through this systematically, but Zelensky is forcing the issue. We're talking about it right now. And eventually, the Biden administration is going to have an answer for him.